It is the scene immediately after the train scene, wherein Chihiro and her companions travel to the house of Zeniba through the dark, swampy forest. The train scene in Spirited Away is a truly otherworldly and contemplative scene. It is also not what we are talking about, as it is by far the most commonly discussed scene when talking about this film. Now, I don't think that is bizarre or strange or not justified. It genuinely is beautiful. It is a moment of profound calm after a very hectic series of events. The film talks about how the bathhouse is this place of corruption and materialism and overstimulation. But it is one thing to hear that, and it is another thing to really feel that. It is entirely different to be away from the flashing lights, away from the excess, away from the sumptuous selfishness, and into something much quieter and more somber. Chihiro is in a land of ghosts, a land that is decaying openly by what the film says. It's a train trip that is only one way. The train used to run both ways, but it doesn't anymore. There is a sense of melancholy. It is a time for great contemplation, of great meditation on the actual nature of things, apart from the overexerting, rather deceptive world of the bathhouse, where everything is mediated through this lens of consumerism. Beyond that, there is a kind of sorrow, and yet there is a kind of genuineness as well. It is a time for silent, earnest, intimate contemplation of a world that is a little sad and a little wistful. And yet there is beauty to this scene, nonetheless, because it calls attention to something above the chaos and the turmoil of the bathhouse world into this broader, more universal contemplation of a kind of wistfulness and liminality that links together life, that is a kind of fate of things. You may or may not be familiar with a Japanese concept called mono no aware, which does not have a direct translation, but the closest would be something like awareness of the transience of things. The greatest example of this in Japanese culture is, of course, the cherry blossoms, which burst with great beauty in the spring, and yet their petals fade. They drop from the trees and are blown by the winds. There is a kind of elegiac sorrow to that, but it represents not something despairing, but a kind of coming to enlightenment. A kind of understanding of a larger nature of things beyond the individual perspective that links together everyone. There is a sense of consolation in this that comes from the recognition of a larger sense of community, a larger sense of collectivity. And I think that is a major reason why that scene is so appealing to people. It's a major reason why that works. It's that same principle, mono no aware. Nonetheless, I do think it is troublesome to fixate so overwhelmingly on one specific scene. As Matthew Arnold talks about, the over-fixation on a specific value system, a specific belief system, a specific set of principles and ideas, however valuable it might be in one respect, however nourishing it is in one way, is limited and constrained in another, inevitably. Because no one perspective, no one worldview can capture the fullness of a complicated and constantly fluctuating world. And so it is necessary to look beyond one's own perspective and take a broader view of things, whatever one personally likes the best. One needs to try to look beyond that. Jung has a quite similar view, where he discusses how the repetition of the same view, the same beliefs, the same self-perception inevitably leads to a kind of calcification. Life force drains out of it, and it becomes the rote repetition of platitudes. There's nothing wrong with any specific ideals of the world or the self, but simply because of their limited repetition, they inevitably become narrow. They inevitably become disconnected from the real, genuine workings of the world, which for Jung, as much as for Arnold, albeit in a different way, are almost incomprehensibly complex and inevitably convoluted. So back to Spirited Away. The scene I specifically want to focus on is the scene right after the train scene. It is the scene wherein Chihiro gets off the train and she is wandering through Swamp Bottom going to Zeniba's house. It is a scene that is surprising because it changes in a way that does not have any loud twists to it. There's no drastic transformation of what the scene is. It is a subtle change, a subtle realization, the going from dread and anxiety to a kind of beauty and clarity and warmth. It starts off as a kind of dark fairy tale. It starts off as Chihiro and her companions wandering through this dark forest alone in a desolate land. There are not a lot of lights. There's not a lot of care or comfort. The overall atmosphere of the scene isn't despondent or despairing necessarily, but it is a little forlorn. It is a scene where one suspects that something dreadful could occur. There is an emphasis on the unknown, the unseen. There is real risk in being in a place like this, and that is what the film emphasizes. Chihiro is fundamentally defined by the end of the film by her selflessness. She starts off the film as a selfish kid. Not in any particularly egregious way, she's just petty. She thinks about her own concerns and she does not really care much about others. This is a trait she shares with her parents, the film implies. It is less a personal failing than a larger collective failing of post-war Japan in a time of great prosperity and great consumerist malaise. Something that then came crashing down. Japan, by the early 2000s, was in what is called the lost decade. After the great Asian economic crash of the late 90s, that empire of consumerism was rapidly unraveling, and Miyazaki uses this film in a way to force a real confrontation with the underside of that consumerism and the world that can be forged outside that milieu. So Chihiro grows by being more selfless, by choosing what is good for others and what is good for the benefit of all, aside from what is pretty and nice for her personally. This trip to Swamp Bottom is a great example of that. Haku is deeply hurt, and to revive him, she goes to the ends of the earth, literally. She goes to this desolate little world in the middle of nowhere, with no guarantee that she will be able to get back. It is a profound act of selflessness. And that selflessness, that love, is transformative. The world she sees gradually becomes more welcoming and more peaceful. A bouncing lamp comes to greet her. This is a reference to Luxo Jr., the bouncing Pixar lamp, as a testament to the relationship between Pixar and Studio Ghibli, and particularly between Pixar head John Lasseter and Hayao Miyazaki. But in a story sense, it represents the coming of light. The emergence of something friendly and welcoming, overcoming the darkness and disorientation of the swamp. And then Zeniba's cottage is very peaceful, almost preternaturally peaceful, almost unrealistically peaceful after what we have seen before in the film. It's this bucolic little ideal world. Zeniba herself is transformed. From what we saw of her before, she was perhaps not as cruel as her sister, but still quite mean and selfish. And yet here she seems grandmotherly, rustically welcoming, invariably sweet. Why? Well, from a thematic perspective, what this means is that Chihiro has made a brave and selfless choice, and that the world around her has been transformed. When you think about this thematically and emotionally and symbolically, and not just on an overt, superficial plot perspective, this makes sense. Chihiro has brought light to this fairy tale world. Light from her actions, light from her love, light from her selflessness. Love, the film declares, is a kind of healing. It is through Chihiro's love that Haku is healed. It is through Chihiro's love that she is able to reunite with her parents, that she's able to escape back to her own world. And it is through her love, demonstrated not through romantic gestures or anything like that, but through a persistent selflessness, that the world is fundamentally transformed. That there is this subtle but inescapable sense of warmth emerging from the most unlikely and ostensibly forlorn of circumstances. Chihiro is not scared. She's anxious, she's uncertain, but she remains committed to the ideals that have developed in her over the course of the film. And so, according to the fairy tale logic that governs many parts of the film, but especially this last section in the swamp, she is rewarded with a kind of healing, with the transformation of the landscape and even of Zeniba herself from despairing and dreadful to warm and inviting. It is a beautiful scene, and I think it deserves more credit, and is sadly overshadowed by the train scene, however great that scene is. This scene of her journey right after is as important and as deserving of study. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can. If you want to see more videos like this before anyone else, keep watching Studio Ghibli films. I have made one of these videos about basically every film made by the studio at this point, but I wanted to wait to really find what I had to say about this film in particular, about which so much has already been said, that was genuinely unique. Anyway, adios, comrades.